Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Alexander Williamson, and this is FISHTORY. On the Secret History channel, it's going to be an all-audio episode as per usual, so there'll be 4 episodes under 10 minutes-ish, and this week is going to be a really interesting week to start off the year 2023. We are on episode 173, and this will run us through 173, 174, 175, and end at 176. So thank you so much to you guys who support this, to the Aquatic Morning Show, if you guys are watching there, or to my members who get to watch all of this early, and they can listen to it all at once, as well as have all the sources and fun links if I have interesting photo links or video links for people to check out elsewhere. It's only $1.99. You get 16 to 20 extra episodes a month, and you're really helping out my channel, and I tried to make it as cheap as possible, so hopefully, a lot of people can support if they like the channel that way, and with enough folks, it'll add up. Alright guys, so for episode number 173, we're going to talk about a new world record in biodiversity, and that is a new world record on the species listed in the Bolivian protected rainforest area known as the Madidi Protected Area. So they just finished a whole new survey with 35 new species to be added to science alone in freshwater fish, as well as tons of plants and reptiles, amphibians. I don't think any new mammals, but this place is a hotspot, and they still haven't gotten into the deep, dark valleys that are in the lowlands of the area. This is a survey of 13 sites where they spent a couple nights at each site with some scientists, or a couple days on the river with a group of people seining nets and with seine nets and electro-shocking the water, as well as now they are combining that with DNA testing, because they're seeing a lot of little fish that they're like, is this a new fish? We don't know. And when they check its DNA, they see that it's completely different. And so they're kind of running into this oh boy moment where they're realizing there are a lot more fish species than they thought in this area. But this is happening every time they do one of these big scientific explorations of an area where you're trying to see how many species are there. So from the invasive Arapaima, the Arapaima gigas or gigas, the mouth-breathing giant that weighs more than 200 kilograms, 350 pounds, and is 9 feet long, 3 meters long, to the seasonally abundant killifish, from the Rivulidae, man, I butchered that, Rivulidae family, that are found in pools all over natural savannas and drier areas near rivers once the weather warms up. And they're only 1.5 centimeters, or less than half an inch long, fully grown. There is a wide range of fish here. They also found the golden dorado, as well as a bunch of migratory catfish, including the Goliath catfish, which was really unexpected. And they also found the teeny cheepy pencil catfish. And the whole thing altogether is pretty cool that they found some local endemic species. Like I was saying, it seems like at least 30 of the 35 probably only live in this one area, or they found the one creek or one lake where they live and have evolved. And because this site is covering an area that goes up to some of the Andean lakes at 4,300 meters in height, that's up very high. So we're talking, 4,000, so that would be somewhere around 12,000 feet high, like almost the top of Mount Rainier, if you know Seattle. It's pretty amazing, and they found even little stagnant ponds with killifish on the way up to there. So pretty interesting. They also found electric knifefish, swamp eels, and in the fast-flowing streams down the way, they found the headwaters of the Amazon. I mean, they didn't find the headwaters, those were known, but they found lots of cool fish there, including the naked catfish, aka the Astroblepus, and they also found a couple new species right there at the transition of where the cool water enters the tropical jungle. And pretty exciting, they found new genus members of the Notus, the Caricidium, and also of the Ernstichthythis, which apparently is a genus for the first time being reported in Bolivia. And then they also found a new Astroblepus, a three-barbled catfish, and a really, really pretty pike cichlid that wasn't known about, as well as a new bumblebee catfish amongst 30 other species that were unknown. So that's pretty cool, and this is now believed to be the most biologically diverse protected site in the world, and it goes to almost 6,000 meters. So we're talking 18,000 feet all the way up the Andes, and then it goes down to the Amazon. And it's a big preserve, but it's only 1.3% of the land in Bolivia that this takes up, yet 40% of the species known to exist in Bolivia exist on this 1.5-ish, we'll just call it 1.5% piece of land. So it's really interesting, and this is just, the start of it, but they really want to bring to the attention of the Bolivian people what a treasure they have, that they found some total of 333 species in 43 different families and 13 orders, and the number doubles what was previously known about the fish living there. That's just fish. That's just the fish living there. So also they were doing surveys of other things with other teams, and that information will come out soon. But just to break it down a little further, they found 139 species of cariforms, followed by 41, which was 41%, and then they found Sulariforms, 137 species, and then which is 42.1%, and then they found Cycliforms, 19 species at 5.7%, which was 88% of the species, and the rest, the other 11.4%, was distributed in 10 more orders, and with the highest number of families belonging to the characins or the caricids, with 73 species. And the second most common family was the Loricarides with 36 species. That's 10%. And then also cichlids rounded it out at 19 species, mostly apistos, and then some larger ones in the open waters of the Amazon. But really cool study, and lots of cool stuff being found. You can't protect what you don't know exists. And this is kind of a nice note, because this area isn't one that's under a lot of threat of logging and things like that compared to other areas in the Amazon. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little talk about this incredible 18,950 square kilometer, that's 7,300 square mile area. And again, it was called the Madidi Wilderness Preserve on the Madeira River Basin, and it conserves 25% of the known species within the Madeira River that runs all the way down into the Amazon through other countries also. So that's pretty cool, and I hope I will talk to you guys later this week. Have a good one. See you the next time. Back to you, Jess. Hey everybody, what is going on? It's Alexander Williamson here, and this is FISHTORY, episode number 174. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I hope you guys enjoy this one, because this one really did blow my mind. So apparently fish can be domesticated, and that's interesting, but apparently humans may have actually domesticated ourselves in the process of domesticating animals, which further divided us from Neanderthals, Denisovans, and any other hominids that were roaming the earth somewhere between 50 and 150,000 years ago. So, the newest research was published in the Journal of Ichthyological Science and iScience, and it looked at genetically modified zebrafish that failed to make BAZ1B protein, and the results suggest that the gene is not only at the cornerstone of physical and behavioral changes in fish and other domesticated species such as cats, dogs, sheep, cattle, you name it. Anything that we have said is domesticated seems to have this change. Now, what's interesting, though, is this does not happen in things like a bobcat. We haven't been able to domesticate most animals. This is kind of a rare trait, and on each continent, you know, there's a few beasts of burden, as we call them, you know, cattle or oxen, as well as camels or sheep, goats, anything big enough to pull along a sled or a plow or even a human. And the New World only seems to have llamas. That's a whole other conversation for Jared Diamond's book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, if you're interested in that topic, and talking about why civilization developed at different rates. It's kind of an interesting book. But back to the subject at hand, and that is the human relationship with pets or animals, essentially. And there is a set definition for what domestication is. And the really interesting part is that now, with that definition in hand, the last 50 or 60 years, we've also found a genetic link in the last 5 or 10 years that seems to show that there's an actual gene for domestication, which is a gene that stops that protein that I just named out from being made. So cats, dogs, they show a genetic difference compared to wolves or cougars or their wild counterparts. And the main thing they all seem to share in common is the variation in the BAZ1B gene. And the genetic changes correlate with several distinct physical and behavioral traits, including smaller facial features, except for the eyes, which tend to be larger, smaller teeth, even smaller skulls, and being more social with their own species and less aggressive with their own species, as well as having less fear or less of a startle mechanism, so things sneaking up on them don't scare them as badly. And this is not just in the presence of humans, but rather anytime. So even if your cat or dog is hanging out in, say, the living room and no one's around, a cougar will freak out if it hears a noise, whereas your cat, well, it may freak out, but it won't freak out as much on according to scientific studies. So the studies have also suggested that modern humans may have domesticated themselves, as now we're finding this gene actually shows up in humans after our split from Neanderthals and Denisovans. So we experience similar physical and behavioral changes, with the bigger eyes, which to humans are always rated as cuter or more attractive, less threatening. Whenever they talk about studies where they have people look at pictures, the big eyes and the eyes that follow with large dilated pupils, those are things that are endearing to us. It's things that make babies cute, make kittens cute. It gives that aw factor. Aww. So these changes have all been linked to that gene, and it turns out that gene is in some of our fish. So, for instance, bettas, goldfish, and Danios, zebra Danios specifically. Also, what happens when this gene is present is they see a much smaller collection of a certain type of neurological stem cell, and that is called the neural crest stem cell. And it's actually a cluster of cells, a few different kinds, but research led by the Queen Mary team at Queen William and Mary's College, as well as in the UK at the Queen Mary College. That's interesting. The team builds on a study from the last year, which was studying the impact of removing that BAZ1B gene function and the impact of doing so on the neural crest. And they found that those cells are directly linked. So when they get rid of that gene, the neural crest, those cells become more active and more abundant again. Now, the mutant zebrafish that they studied were found to be more socially prone to interacting peacefully with one another, not chasing each other and nipping at each other's fins, with the functional BAZ1B gene active. And they showed an increased tendency to interact with members of their same species in numbers, to come to feedings, and all sorts of other things. And they also looked at wild zebrafish, and they don't have this. Plus, they also noticed that they're easily startled, and that when they're young, they tend to group together, but by 3 weeks old, they don't do that anymore. Whereas the domestic kind, they will do that in a peaceful way. And the only other time you're going to see that in both kinds is as a fear response to being chased or something coming at them quickly. And they actually had monitors set up with like white light all day long, and then all of a sudden there'd be a dot of like a little fish getting closer, 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 and then, you know, chasing them. And they would count their startle or reaction time in the tank, and how much they scattered versus how much they stayed close to one another. And the really interesting thing is that the fish that they've studied actually show distinct facial features changing too. So they actually saw altered size of eyes and width of their protruding forehead, and the ratio between eyes, nose, and mouth, or snout and eyes and mouth. And they also had a massive reduced anxiety reflex, which was associated with color and health as well. So to measure these different variables, there's a lot of data that they had to collect. But the zebrafish, specifically, they were looking at a brief flash of this fish on a light panel, and the distance traveled over a 5-minute period following that flash. So how anxious they're pacing around and swimming around, as well as when they did the flash, they'd do an acoustic noise that was like a air horn that would startle them, and they would wait and see how long it took them to settle down again. So in all cases, the mutant zebrafish with this domesticated gene recovered more quickly following those changes, and they indicated far less fear and scattering in the first place. So this is really interesting news, and it gives us a new definition to work with to look at animals that may have even latent genes of being domesticated. Now, these fish in their neural crest, they have a whole bunch of the little stem cells in them by the time they're adults, but when they're larvae, they don't have those stem cells. And so they're wondering, at what age does that have an impact? Do those cells actually have to do with slowing down the neurological responses in domesticated animals, or what's going on? But it's interesting to see that this gene across everything from mammals like humans and cats and dogs over to now fish and even birds appears to be the same shared gene that goes way back, and they're trying to figure out what in the heck that could be about. So the person behind this study was Jose Vicente Perez, and it was out of Queen Mary University in London that it was published, and since then it's been picked up in the US at William and Mary College out of Virginia. So pretty cool stuff. And you know, the new takeaway that they're wondering about this is if the process of domestication and getting rid of that gene selectively, if that was what caused humans to actually form into social groups, to form language, to get to cooperate and to build cities and complex networks and things, because they can actually now go back into our DNA, and they're looking at when we started to see an increase in these traits of being domesticated when that gene was turned off. So this is going to be a big deal in a lot of different disciplines. This crosses over into, you know, sociology and psychology and everything in between, anthropology, biology. So it's really interesting to see this study, and I'm very interested to see what the discourse will be, because this will probably be rather contentious whether, you know, this is a thing or not, because in the past people have been very specific about what domestication is, and this opens up a whole new frontier of saying, yeah, guppies, you know, yeah, goldfish, they're domesticated. And then why is it that they have this trait built in on the same gene that keeps them calm? What is it in our shared ancestral past 500 million years ago plus that would make us calm and submissive like that, and cooperative with one another with big ol' eyes? It's just, it's very interesting. So I hope you guys liked today's episode. I was fascinated by it, and I hope you guys look into it more if you're interested in it, or if you know more about it, I'd love to hear about it. So let's chat about it in the comments if you guys do know more about it, or end up doing more research than I have time to do right now. I'd love to hear about it. Have a good day, you guys, and I'll talk to you next time. Hello, everybody, and we are on episode number 175, and that is an episode of FISHTORY, as you expect, and it is an interesting little study that came out of Thailand, and that is, what is the ideal or perfect amount of water to ship a live betta? And what is the smallest amount of water to ship a live betta without seeing health impacts that are detrimental long term? So without seeing deaths, without seeing stress that leads to liver damage, or anything from asphyxiation from not enough oxygen and CO2 buildup, all the way to burnt gills, to muscle tissue strain. And so they really studied a lot of different factors in this, and they call them Siamese, we'll call them boxing, but you guys know what they call them, fish, in the actual study. But YouTube doesn't like that term because animals shouldn't be quarreling, and it censors them, so we're going to keep that off for the Aquatic Morning Show to stay monetized. But the betta splendens, there we go, that's a fine name we can all agree on for those fish. During local transportation in the country of Thailand, all males were monitored, and they all had the same body weight, plus or minus half a gram, and they looked at around 190 individuals packed in transparent bags containing different water volumes, and they split up these fish that were all genetically related to one another, and they put some in bags with 40 milliliters of water. That's not much. Some with 60, some with 80, some with 100, and some with 120, and finally some with 140 milliliters. So that's, 1/10 of a liter. It's not much, guys. So then they left a 1-to-3 air ratio. So they just didn't want to fuss with air. They wanted to make sure that there was plenty of air, 3 times the air of water by volume. And then they packed them all the same way in old school bags that don't breathe. They're not breather bags or anything. And they just sent them through the Thai post office through standard shipping routes that are common in the hobby. 5 different destinations, and then they returned them. So it was a total of a 48-hour on average transport. Some went as long as 72, some were as short as 38 hours. So on arrival back at the laboratory, the specimens were then immediately harvested, and they took samples of the water quality, noted if they survived, noted any color changes, took pictures of them with a calibrated camera, and then a Photoshop-like program that allowed them to select color and see how close it was versus how faded it was from the trip. They checked their digestive enzymes, their gut bacteria, their skin coloration, their slime coat, their muscle quality, and the different compounds and compositions of their biology as a whole. So they looked at things like lactic acid and digestive enzymes, as well as hormones and things too, like creatine and testosterone, estrogen, all sorts of things. And then in the water, they looked at pH, temperature, dissolved oxygen, ammonia, any other particulates that might have been there, pretty much everything but total dissolved solids. And the survival and weight loss as well was tracked, so how much they went to the bathroom or if they went to the bathroom, and they were all fasted on the same game plan before being shipped. But they found that with the fish, shipping them 80 to 100 milliliters of water was best for like stress look and everything immediately when opening. But what was interesting was it gave them more space to exert themselves and to strain their muscles and to build up fear responses, which raised their cortisols and also their adrenaline, which then also kind of aggravated apparently their muscle tissue and caused some slight muscle strain and wasting, which unlike when they used less than 80 milliliters of water, which then they couldn't swim much. They're kind of in one corner of the bag or the other, or dead center. And at 40 milliliters, they can't really go anywhere. It's like basically just a little enough just to keep them wet all around almost. And under that, they did terribly. So that is where they started to see deaths even in this short shipping. And it's kind of interesting though that there is a too much water to ship at least bettas in, but I would assume this would apply to a lot of fish, and that the water quality didn't seem to actually be better after the 80 milliliter to 140 milliliter. That dissolved water, the extra water, didn't seem to protect the fish in any meaningful way. It basically was as helpful as it was going to be at 80, and with 60 they found that was kind of the sweet spot between the problem starting at 40, and I think one or two at 60 had an issue, but at 80, one or two had an issue also going the other way of having too much room to move and basically stressing themselves out that way, slamming into the wall of the thing probably, of the bag, and just the noises and thing probably startle them. So it's just kind of interesting because they've decided now that 80 milliliters is the optimal water volume for shipping one male betta alone. Also, the survival rate of the fish packed in 40 milliliters of water, which was the next group down, was 86.7%, and it was lower, obviously, than the 100% that survived in the 60 milliliters of water. So it's kind of interesting that the 60 milliliters, none of them died, but there was still the stress. So 80 was that sweet spot. Going higher than 80, you gave them room to stress themselves out, basically. And bettas being kind of a, I guess, reclusive fish at times, they kind of like having a corner in your tank, if you've noticed. Sometimes they'll swim around and explore and things, but that's not their default usually. They're kind of hanging out under one spot or in a corner or on a leaf. And it's thought that they probably just get stressed out with too much room to move around in the dark, and there's more vibrations in the bag being amplified. So it turns out 80 milliliters is the sweet spot. Ship your bettas in 80 milliliters of water. This is kind of a crazy study, but it's interesting nonetheless, and I'd like to see what they come up with if they ever study this with other fish. What do you guys think? I mean, milliliters is a little hard to say, to compare for folks, but yeah, but this is a weird study to kind of try to say, because it's the difference at 60 milliliters versus 80 milliliters is 2.2 ounces versus 2.6.5 or 2.7 ounces of water, which in most people's head probably it doesn't tell them. It's hard to approximate in your mind, but if that helps you in ounces, there it is. But it's a fairly small amount of water, and I thought that it was interesting that they found that the 3 times the air to the water was also ideal when shipping them in those old school bags. They did note that the breather bags were probably the best way to ship them, due to reducing the amount of vibrations and stress in there. So, for what it's worth, there you go. I hope you guys have a good day and have an ideal amount of whatever it is you need to get you through the day today. Not too much, not too little. 80 milliliters of it. Alright guys, I'll see you next time. Alright guys, so today we have a short fish story to make up for the first 2 that were a little longer. You know, I tend to do that because I'm a jerk. But episode number 176, Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. A man was killed by a needlefish that jumped while he was fishing and went into his throat and slashed his throat. Probably just demonetized your morning show today, Jess. Sorry about that. Anyways, in the Philippines, a fisherman was killed by a leaping needlefish of 2.5 feet approximately in length. The needlefish just jumped out of the water when Jesus Guerrero was fishing off Sitio Gupa early Tuesday morning, and the needlefish, which are locally known as baru, jumped out of the water and just nailed him right on the dock, through the throat, and he fell over and from blood loss died there pretty immediately. He managed to pull the 30 centimeter or 12-inch long fish out of his neck, but died less than a minute later, despite attempts from his son and brother to save him. Now, this sounds like the weirdest freak accident ever, but apparently in 2007, a 16-year-old boy died after being stabbed through the heart by a needlefish. He jumped in the water and startled a needlefish in northern Vietnam, and it went right through him. Not that he landed on it in shallow water, but jumping off a boat. And it went through his heart and killed him instantly pretty much there too. Now, another one also got a man in 2009 when the beak of the needlefish got stuck in his face after it leapt from the waters in the Mediterranean Sea, and it stuck him in the cheek, and it went through his cheek and face and out through his nose. So man, these fish must have quite the sharp, I mean, yeah, needlefish, I get it, but man, to go through your face just by jumping, it went through his nasal cavity and he needed reconstructive surgery. And then yet another case of this in the last 15 or 20 years. In 2004, a needlefish jumped from the sea in Guadalupe off the coast of Mexico and impaled a man in his eye socket, resulting in him losing his sight and almost dying. So, needlefish. Now, that's the same fish that I've mentioned before, that its mouth is so small you can't get it on a normal lure. So when you're fishing for needlefish, what they do is they try to tangle up its little tiny teeth that are needle-like and its long, sharp beak that's needle-like, and they try to gum it up on things like spiderweb in the Pacific Islands and of Samoa. That is where they actually fly kites, and below it hangs a ball of spider silk, and they bite it to check it out and see what it is, and it gets stuck on their teeth, and then they can catch the fish. And they can catch many fish with that same piece of spider silk. And so they've come up with synthetic means similar to this of floating traps, and then the fish will come up and strike it and then get stuck on it, and you can either pull it in if it's on a line or leave them on a line strung out. But just another weird crossover, and I guess if you're going in the ocean, beware of needlefish. Jeez, I mean, there's probably a long list of things that people are afraid of harming them in the ocean, and yeah, needlefish weren't one of them for me. I mean, barracudas were, and there have been more deaths by needlefish than barracuda in the last 20 years that I could confirm. So, well, I hope you guys have a great day, and that you keep away from needlefish or wear proper medieval armor. And that is your week's shakedown of FISHTORY. Thanks for watching. As always, if you want to join the channel as a member and support FISHTORY and what I do here and in my other videos, my travels, or have me come speak at your clubs or get-togethers, you know, maybe you're having a bachelor party and you really want to talk about fish. I assume that is no one, but maybe you do, and if so, just get a hold of me. I love traveling to talk to clubs or at events, so trying to plan out my 2023 right as we speak. Alright guys, have a good one. I will talk to you later. Bye-bye!